Hi, welcome to Ancient Mysteries Unearthed podcast episode number 2. I'm your host, Chris Noble, and today we are talking about something very important to me, very dear to my heart, and that is therapy. Therapy is so important. We're all human. We all suffer from anxiety, from stress, from all these things that pelt us on a daily basis. It festers under the surface, and how do we deal with these things? Well, therapy is one of the best ways to deal with mental and emotional and spiritual stresses and anxieties. Now, were the ancients any different? Were the ancients totally oblivious of this? Did they not need to have healing? Did they not need to have therapy? Of course they did, right? They're human, just like we are today. So my questions are, how did the ancients deal with stress and anxiety? How did the ancients use healing and therapy as a part of their daily practice? Was it completely different than what we do today with the pharmaceutical industry? Was it similar? We're going to go into that discussion today on the podcast, and for that reason, I wanted to invite Dr. Haley Fox to the episode to discuss more about her perspective on therapy from modern times and, of course, from ancient times. So, without further ado, let's start the podcast, and I'll come back at the end for a couple of words in closing. Enjoy. Hi, welcome to Ancient Mysteries Unearthed. I'm your host, Chris Noble, and this is episode 2 of the podcast for Ancient Mysteries Unearthed. And in today's episode, I wanted to talk about therapy and other forms of healing that we see not only in ancient times, but sort of rediscovering and that we're seeing in modern times today. From my experiences traveling around the world and visiting ancient sites, ruins, examining artifacts, seeing things of that nature, there seems to be lost knowledge. There seems to be some form of being, a way of understanding reality, a way of understanding the sciences that we consider today. And it seems that the ancients had a different perspective. It seems that they had a different way of viewing how to heal people, how to better society as a whole, at least during certain parts of our ancient history. So with all that in mind, I wanted to bring onto the show today Dr. Haley Fox to talk more about, from her perspective, not just art therapy, which is her area of expertise, but also her perspective on what she's experienced examining ancient civilizations, ancient cultures, because I had the privilege of meeting Haley when we were in South Africa together about a year ago with researcher and investigator Michael Tellinger when he put together a 2-week intensive, I wouldn't call it a tour, I'd call it more of an expedition, certainly, where we were looking around at these stone circle ruins, in which there's millions of them over South Africa. And we'll get into the details of that a little bit more into the show. But for today's episode, I want to welcome Dr. Haley Fox to talk more on this topic of ancient art therapy, sound therapy, and forms of therapy that we're rediscovering today. Haley, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here. How you doing?
Thanks for having me. I'm doing great. How exciting that this is our 1-year anniversary of having met and had that incredible experience you talked about.
I know. It's kind of crazy. My Facebook feed's been reminding me over the last couple of weeks. And, it's really amazing because I think for myself, that trip to South Africa was very much an inception point for the show that we're on right now today and furthering the research that I've done in this area. But connecting with people like you is really the best part about it, because I'm a curious person. I don't have any answers to these questions that I'm asking on the show, and that's why I like having you and people like yourself to come on and talk more about it. So before we get into the details, why don't we give the audience a bit of a little background on who you are, what's your educational background, and what brought you to where you are today, where you've got this really great perspective of, the hard sciences, the material sciences, but then also with an open-minded sort of perspective to maybe, let's call it, the more spiritual sciences or different ways of viewing healing and health. So a little bit of a background would be great.
Yeah, and I don't want to go on too long about this, but I do feel like it deserves a little bit of explanation in terms of my lens and the way I look at the world and my academic interests and so on. I do have a PhD in clinical psychology, but I'm not like other clinical psychologists, I wouldn't say. My theoretical orientation is deeply rooted in archetypal psychology and the work of James Hillman, and that was the case almost from the beginning. I did my bachelor's degree, actually started out in a music therapy program combining music and psychology, found that too restrictive, believe it or not. And so my last year in college, I transferred to St. Olaf College, which had a para-college at the time, is what they called it. But it was an opportunity to sort of design your own curriculum, design your own major. And what I actually did, even at the bachelor's level, was an integrated approach to psychology and therapy and the arts, all of the arts, not just music, but any of the arts. I've always appreciated and felt very profoundly sort of with what all the arts have in common in the way that they operate on human psyche, and saw no point in separating them out. and so now, even as an art therapist, I sort of view that word art, as being multimodal and not just about visual art. So following that, I got my master's degree in expressive arts therapy. I studied with Sean McNiff and Paolo Canill, and who both had expertise in intermodal expressive arts therapy, which is kind of just what I described, applying all of the arts into therapeutic work. And that has, as you mentioned, that has roots not just in modern psychological theories, but in shamanism, in ancient practices. For as long as there have been humans, there's been this very human engagement in the arts, and that has been a path to understanding the world, to self-actualization, to healing wounds, all of that. And so that's one of the sort of the tradition that I was raised in at the master's level. And then even at the PhD level, when I got my PhD in clinical psychology, I focused on how the arts serve that process of understanding human psychology and helping people through healing. So I have my board certification in art therapy and in music therapy. And then more recently, when it became available, I was able to get registered as an expressive arts therapist, which more closely matches that sort of intermodal approach.
Right. And what I failed to mention at the beginning of this for our audience is that Haley is now part of the core faculty in the Department of Counseling and Art Therapy at Adler University. So just to give you guys a perspective of where Haley's at now, thing is we're going to talk about an experience and things that are related, of course, to the experience that we both had in South Africa. And before we get into that, because there's a wonderful essay that Dr. Haley Fox has written that we will be discussing today in the episode about the experience in South Africa and all the incredible topics that kind of stem from that experience. But just to kind of prime and give a sort of a primer for our audience, Haley, do you want to maybe tell us what was the initial reason for you to even go to South Africa? I think we all had slightly different reasons for wanting to go and why we were drawn to the work of Michael Tellinger. So maybe give us a bit of a sense of why did you want to go?
Yes, I think that's true. And I was delighted to be able to be allowed to go because I felt like my interests might not be matching other people's interests. But it's rooted in, my fascination with the arts and human psychology, primarily, as we talked about. And my primary as an undergraduate, as a master's level student, as a PhD graduate, my primary interest in research has always been research grounded in the arts. So not just interested in studying the arts, but in using the arts as primary tools of inquiry for research. So have an interest in art-based research. And then the topical areas that I was interested in applying that to included things like resonance, like what is it about musical sounds or just sound in general and vibrations? How does that impact human responses and human psychology? How can that be a healing tool? And Michael Tellinger, as you may know, started out as a musician himself and has actually written quite a bit about vibrations and resonance. And that was my first introduction to Michael Tellinger, actually, was through that vein of interest in resonance. But I'm also interested in visual art forms, in petroglyphs and hieroglyphs and artifacts, and even just how people choose certain shapes of stones to do things with, and so forth. And my interest in that is not so much. It's kind of at the most basic primal level, where I see all, basic shapes like circles and slash marks and wave lines and things like that as being part of the building blocks of human psyche. I'm a visual thinker, and I see that human thinking has evolved certainly to very sophisticated language, but started out much more basic than that, with really basic sounds and shapes and so on. So I was interested in looking at what the ancients were using to adorn themselves with, what they were selecting in their environment, what they were drawing on stones or etching and things like that, and what that might reveal about their psychology, about how their humanity was revealed even then in the same way that it continues to be revealed now. So that's not very articulately stated, but those
No.
images that drew me there.
It's actually great. Actually, I really like that, because it got me thinking, and this is, again, one more little note to make before we go into your essay here, because it got me thinking that, I get a lot of questions from friends of mine who aren't necessarily interested in ancient civilizations, ancient history, things of that nature. Honestly, I don't think I was that into it when I was in school, to be honest. It was more after and hearing all these alternative theories that were very fascinating and kind of got me more interested into all this. But I think there's something really interesting to understand, how were we thinking in the past? And I think one of the interesting things that comes out of that question is that, yes, we've evolved. Yes, we've definitely created some pretty complicated ways of communication nowadays. However, there's a simplified method of communication from back in the day that almost feels not necessarily primitive. It seems like there was a lot of knowledge sometimes in the way that they're communicating, even through very simple shapes, concepts of potentially astronomy, concepts of physics, concepts of reality that we can articulate today. Maybe they couldn't in the past, but they may have been knowledgeable of these things. I think what we do is we discredit sometimes that the people in the past didn't have any idea about what was going on, when I think we're finding, and we'll go more into this, but I'm curious just to briefly hear your thoughts on like what did you think of past humans versus now, since an expedition like we had in South Africa? Has your opinion kind of changed on how we used to be, basically?
Yeah, I've studied a little bit about ancient Greek music, and one of the interesting things I noted there was that when we don't have any examples of it laying around to actually listen to recordings, things like that, but when people wrote about it, Plato, Aristotle, and so forth, it's interesting to me that they didn't make a distinction between sound and movement, for example. It was all tied together as a single thing. And I think as we've progressed in the world, if you think of progressing as moving in a linear way, moving forward in time, we've become more specialized and sort of separated out these different aspects of humanity. So it's easy to conceptualize nowadays someone standing at a microphone on a stage and singing an aria without even moving their body at all. For some of us, that would be difficult to do, but for others, it's very possible. I think our ancestors could not even conceive of that. And if you look at a baby who's just born, I mean, they move and feel and sing and make shapes all at the same time. There's no distinction from it. And I think that's where humanity is rooted. And if we really want to get to kind of our root feelings, for example, explore a deep process, work through a trauma, even that kind of thing, we need to go to that basic human experience and feel it in our body and move it through the air and make a sound that corresponds with it to better understand what's happening. So I think we're the same in many ways as we were then. We've just kind of, at times, to the detriment of our health, we've sort of sanitized parts of our human experience. We've learned one of the things I appreciate as an art therapist is I can do art therapy with someone and I feel confident that the art's never going to lie. There's always something genuine and true about what's coming forward from a person in the way they make art. People can lie like crazy with their words. they can, say a sentence that doesn't correspond at all or isn't rooted to what their experience is. And so it's a lot more to tease through when you're doing talk therapy, in my view. I mean, I've done talk therapy as well, but it's just much more direct access to that humanity when you're using the arts.
And I, for myself as an artist, so my background being in music as a musician and a filmmaker, but primarily with music, I find it's the language of emotion. And I'll tell this to a director that's, hiring me to compose a score or something, where I feel very privileged to have the job to manipulate everyone's emotions, right? We absolutely manipulate them through visuals and through a compelling scene in a movie, a tearjerker kind of romance scene. Okay, we'll all get the gist without music. However, you add in that music and it'll just punch you right in the face with emotion. And you'll be bawling. And it's the difference between maybe not necessarily crying on a scene like that and absolutely bawling your eyes out with the right music. And what I guess I'm trying to get at is that, these were forms of communication and a form of emotional communication that is still relevant today. And it's something that, like you said, it's a really good point. You can't lie. You can't really lie with the arts. People see through, like, how many times have people said, it kind of felt fake, or it wasn't just sort of didn't feel very genuine. This is easy to pick up on in the arts because you're right. You can't really mask these things, which is really interesting.
We try to, actually. I don't know how many times I've seen a piece of art and I might see something in it. And, I don't like throw things in people's faces till they're ready to see things. But now and then I'll say, did you notice this over here? And they'll say, oh my gosh, I didn't even know I did that. So there's something that comes forward, from the roots of a person's humanity.
100%. So I think with that in mind, it's a good segue. Let's get right into this wonderful essay that you've written. And for the audience watching, we will link this in the description below so you guys can access this, the PDF. And that's very kind of Haley to let us access this, because it's a really interesting. And it's not just for myself, because I experienced, I was with Haley during this time in South Africa, but it is very interesting because it expands on these ideas that we're talking about and gives some interesting references for the audience to sort of further look into. So one of the first things that you touch on in this essay, and I'm pulling it up here, and I'm going to read just a couple sentences and then just get you to comment on it, Haley, because I think this is a very interesting topic to go into before we get into the experiences, before we get into even the certain sciences, which is the overall scientific paradigm, academic paradigm that we're currently in right now. And it's important, and I talk about this, and I probably will talk about it on almost every episode, because I think it's so important for people to understand that while science is all about seeking truth and understanding nature and reality, if you don't think there's politics involved, you're crazy, and if you don't think in academia that it's the same thing, not just with politics, but with ways of thinking, ways of thinking have changed. What used to be deemed as absolutely 100% correct, this is the way it is, the earth absolutely, is the center of the universe, everything revolves around us. That's been, of course, disproven, right? Things like that used to be fact, now they're not fact. We keep going through these phases. And to me, I don't think we're ever going to end. I think we just keep discovering new truths, new realities. So anyway, this is what you wrote, and I'd love to get your comments on it. So, original ideas predictably meet with certain controversy, potentially dividing people and forestalling scientific progress. This is a common enough occurrence, sadly. At times, even the most brilliant thinkers are not fully recognized for their genius until after they're gone. And that's the end of that quote. And that makes me think again of these brilliant minds that have come up in science, Galileo, Copernicus, all these people that have proposed to us now basic ideas that are fundamentals in science, but at the time were rejected. So when you say something like that, what's been your experience with that?
Yeah, I understand people's attachments to the way things exist. It's really, the way to current thinking. Because it's scary to be going out on a limb and thinking of something completely different that sort of turns your whole world upside down. So I have compassion for people who are holding tightly to, to existing paradigms. I do believe, though, that we are really on the precipice of a sort of an evolution in human consciousness right now, where many things we've taken for granted may be changing. And I think there are many of us who already have experience of higher ways of experiencing consciousness. I don't know if I should say higher, different ways to experiencing different dimensions of consciousness
Mhm.
that aren't yet routine, but are just as ordinary as any other way of experiencing the world, each other, human connections, things like that. So, and I think it's really important at this time in history that we remain as open as we can to new ideas, because if we do not move into this new realm of consciousness, we are likely to instead move into catastrophe
Mm.
because the kind of paradigms we've been living in aren't going to be working much or as well in the
Well, they need
future.
a shift, right? Like we need a shift right now, of course, right?
Yeah, we need to not throw the baby out with the bathwater either. We don't want to cast our scientific method to the wind and move in to a more magical way of thinking. That would be going backwards. But we do need to find a way to embrace what we know, embrace our rational thinking and how we do that, and be able to transcend that into other ways of thinking about intuition and the kinds of things that plant medicine might introduce us to, or deep meditation processes, or other kinds of engagement with the arts and music. Um,
Yeah.
People who've been heavily into those traditions are the people I'm talking about, who've had an experience of something that actually transcends rational thought.
No,
Yeah.
100%. I mean, that's just it brings up the something else that you mentioned in your essay, which is we need balance. And that's, I think, the whole world in every aspect and every subject and every topic and every way you could even describe the world is out of balance, I think, in pretty well every way possible. So what
I
we
would challenge you to even rethink that terminology. That
Sure.
when that's almost a concept that resides in our current paradigm. That concept of balance, of weighing this against that, having enough of this and enough of that. I think the paradigm we're entering is more about holding those paradoxes together at the same time,
Mm,
if that makes sense. So
mm,
it's a slight difference. It's in a way, it's how we heal our political divisions. Um, it's like both existing and being embraced in a way that honors all of that. Um,
yeah.
yeah, that's kind of heady. I didn't think I was
No.
going to go there, but
It's okay. No, no, no.
did I
I
lose
I
you? You
appreciate
froze
that.
up.
I totally appreciate
Okay,
that because it's
your
and
picture
sorry, we had a
froze,
bit of a
but
lag there with our internet connection, but I think that's really important to mention because it's what you were saying in your essay, which is, there's also this there's benefits to both ways of thinking in a sense where you've got, if you're going too open-minded, that becomes gullible, right? And then if you become too close-minded, that becomes essentially a point of denial, right? You're just absolutely denying these new things.
yeah.
So I think that's a great point, and it kind of brings me to the next part of this essay, which is getting now into more musical resonance. This is right up my alley, of course, and it's something that we both experienced, and I've experienced it, and I know I'm sure you have in other environments and other situations. But you brought some questions with you to South Africa, and from what I gathered, in your essay with these questions, which are, can improvised music amplify vibrational frequencies in already resonant spaces? So, for example, and what we experienced, we're going into these stone circle ruins, but you could go into a temple, you could go into a pyramid, whatever these places are, and would you have an amplified experience because of the space that you're in? And if so, how does that work? I don't know if you've got any more insight into this, because this is something I've always been not only curious about, but I'm almost becoming obsessive with how these acoustic spaces not only work and not only amplify these experiences, but the ancients clearly knew this and were building with this in mind, in my opinion. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I believe more and more that there's something really special about sound vibrations and music. And I've experienced it in many ways in my career, as you know, as you suggested, just as like a music therapist trying to create therapeutic spaces with people, bringing people together to do drum circles, even just out of an intuition, performing a song for a client who seems to need to hear that particular thing right then. And I think that that is most impactful and most profound when it's live, you know, in vivo, when there's a sense of that interpersonal connection, and when a skilled therapist can sort of sense what the room is calling for and bring that, or to kind of match whatever it needs to resonate with. That's something, you know, there are a lot of wonderful things about incorporating recorded music into therapeutic settings, but it can never do what, you know, a live musician can do in a space. One of the really beautiful examples I've seen of that is when music therapists go into hospital settings where you have all these artificial sounds of machines and monitors and things going off, and someone brings a guitar in there and kind of incorporates that into a musical experience that makes it easier for that individual who's maybe tied up to these instruments to sort of embrace that experience, and it kind of holds the space for them in a beautiful way. So that's one example. I might, can I jump ahead? Can we talk a little bit about plant medicine here?
Go for it.
Because this kind of relates. I think I've said to you, I recently had my very first ayahuasca experience. And there was something I learned about that musical resonance within that experience. It was a little bit unexpected. As I mentioned, the art therapy, music therapy, expressive arts therapy traditions are really rooted in ancient practices like shamanism and so forth. So when I'm in kind of a space where there's a shamanic kind of experience going on that incorporates the arts, it has this tendency to be very healing psychologically, to kind of bring me in touch with things I need to see and experience, and take me through a healing process. Even when I'm not even necessarily looking for that, it's just, you know, it's what happens in that kind of space. So I was in this ayahuasca space, and I remember having these really intense visual images coming to me, like technicolor images of little Mayan figures dancing, and colors that were brilliant beyond anything you might see in what I would call our consensual reality, outside that sort of a sacred space. And there was music accompanying these images that I was seeing. And it was as if they were dancing for me, putting on a little show, and they were so assisted by that musical backdrop. And here's what sort of surprised me. I was deep in this space when the facilitator of the shamanic experience was ready to move on to something different. And so he gradually, not suddenly, but sort of stopped the music and then began engaging in some spoken prayer and some direction for the group and so forth. And I noticed that as that music was withdrawn, the visual images just gradually sort of faded, and they looked less brilliant for a while, and then it was like they just gave up and they didn't exist at all anymore. And I am confident as I can be, that if that music had continued, those visual images would have continued. So there is some kind of something that music and sound vibrations bring to experiences like that.
I think
nothing else.
100%, and I think you're. This is very interesting because it's making me think of a couple experiences. So, I guess on a more less of a psychedelic level, I experienced my first bit. I had two sort of parts of music therapy. First was as a child starting to play the piano. I never realized that this was subconscious, but every day I would sit down and just improvise. I didn't even know it was called improvisation. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't care. I was just hitting notes. Oh, that sounds nice. Oh, that sounds nice. And go from there, basically. But looking back on that, I was realizing, I didn't really enjoy school very much. And I had, even as a kid, just a lot of stress when I was at school. So coming back from school, it was an ultimate form of decompression, relaxation, and getting rid of any anxiety I would have had. I didn't do this consciously, but I just did it subconsciously. And that's kind of my first foray into sort of the therapeutic elements of music. But later on, after graduating from college, I started playing retirement homes and old age homes. And I experienced some incredible experiences where I would perform a song. Let's say it was an Elvis tune, and a woman afterwards would come up to me, and this happened on many different occasions, would come up to me and just say, that song was played at my prom, and you basically teleported me back to that time in my life. And this woman suffers from dementia. This woman also suffered from Alzheimer's. So she would have a trouble remembering her own kids' names, her daughter's name, for example. She couldn't recall all the time, but she could recall every word of this Elvis song in great detail. And it brought her right back to that experience. And furthermore, I had an experience as well when I was camping, and a friend of mine had done some psychedelic drugs, and I could tell he was going into a pretty bad place. You could just look at him and you could see the color was draining from his face. And I had my guitar with me, and I just started improvising. And I started improvising something that felt right. It felt like something to help take him from this not great place and bring him into a better state of consciousness. And it worked. And in today's day and age, where you need to have analytics and data and things like that to back it up, there is stuff out there that can certainly reaffirm these things we're talking about, but it isn't in incredible detail. But I can certainly at least back you up on that from personal experience and say that it's absolutely real. It's absolutely something that heals and works with people, but it's like a synergy. So I think you've got some sort of interesting concoction going on when you've got music or sound, and then you've got a sacred space, and then we've got, maybe with the stones of these circles that we were sometimes sitting in South Africa, they have a resonant quality already to them. Maybe it's the type of, when I was in Egypt, the type of granite that the temples were made out of have crystal in them. So maybe there's something to do with the material. There's something to do with the actual architecture. There's something to do with the environmental space. And then, of course, you've got music. You've got the sound, which is so important. And I think that kind of segues me into, maybe we should talk about, and I would like to talk about our experience at a place called Adam's Calendar in South Africa. And for our audience who's watching, Adam's Calendar was named by, it was basically brought to the public's attention by Michael Tellinger. And I'll be linking quite a few links in the description so you guys can check out all the things we're talking about, especially related to Michael Tellinger. He's got tons of YouTube videos and information online that you can access. And Adam's Calendar is a very interesting spot. I sometimes describe it like it's a sort of a Stonehenge of South Africa. Not quite, but it's a circle. It's an old stone circle with, it's in a very much of a ruined state, but it still has some functionality to it from a sacred and spiritual perspective. And we went there twice as a group, and we, each time, especially the first time, individually, everyone in that group, there's 12 of us, we all had very incredible experiences, all different experiences, but all very profound experiences. But of course, Haley, I'd love to hear from your perspective. Let's walk the audience through, like, what was this experience of Adam's Calendar?
Yeah. And if I can just tag on to the beautiful statements you made about music before, I do want to emphasize that there's another really important ingredient to those profound experiences, and that is a kind of humility. That bringing music into a space like you did with your friend, you can't do it if your head is in an ego space of performing. Let me pull out everything I can do. You really have to serve the space and serve what's there, and that's that's a special gift to be able to do that, I think, to get out of your own way and to bring that kind of humility into a space like that. I think at Adam's Calendar, we all kind of did that. I do think, there's a concept in psychology called priming, which assisted us in that we we primed ourselves before entering that sacred space.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't see that as something manipulative. I think it's a way of honoring the space and what's possible there, and preparing people to enter it with the right kind of attitude, which would be respectful. And so to prime ourselves, we just very simply stood in a circle. There's in one of those primal shapes again, stood in a circle where everyone was equal and could see each other, held hands, said 3 ohms, I think, together.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not even sure. It might have been Garrett, who's another psychologist there, or maybe Michael, who orchestrated that priming. I didn't have anything to do with that, but it was very useful, I think. And even that experience was enough to bring one of our party to tears. It was just so moving. Even before we got into the calendar, I remember her needing to take some breaths and gather herself before entering the space. But we all sort of filed into the space then, kind of in a orderly way. And then each of us sort of found a different space in the calendar to kind of sort of on our own, I don't know, whatever space spoke to us or something. So even that was kind of a movement improvisation where we didn't have a plan. Nobody knew where they were going to land, but people found a place where they felt they resonated, where they felt comfortable. Some were lying on their backs, some were standing, facing different stones. I found myself perched on top of a sturdy stone and just kind of sitting up, almost in a meditative kind of state, waiting, waiting for something to happen.
Yeah.
There we are.
Just pulling up some images to go with
calendar.
Yeah, just to go with what we're talking about right now. And so continue your thought. I'm just going to pull up some images so our audience can see kind of what we're talking about here.
And so just to tell a story, as you said, there were 12 of us. Everyone was kind of doing their own thing in a way, really respectfully. And I had brought along a ceremonial flute with me just in case. Not that I necessarily had a plan of playing it, but again, with that humility, had it along and felt like if it wanted to be played, it would let me know. So there I am with my flute. There was some point after I'd situated myself in that spot that that flute really wanted to be played. So I brought it out and just waited until some breath moved through me first, and then some music moved through me. I'm not sure today. I certainly couldn't fully retrieve what came out. I might not even remember it if I were to hear it played. I kind of got into this Shiksa-mi-hai sort of flow state and let it be what it was. I'm not even sure how long it lasted. Do you know? Was it like 5 minutes, 10 minutes?
Well, what I can say for sure is it was at least 5 to maybe 8 minutes long. And what I'm going to do quickly here is I will stop sharing those images for a sec. We'll pull those up in a bit. And what we'll do is I took very quick video for our audience, so you guys can take a look at this. This is the master of music therapy because I have to, as a testimonial, when Haley started playing her flute, it was a game changer. It really was a great example yet again of this synergy of the vibration, the music, the intention behind the music, perhaps even the instrument itself. This was a ceremonial flute. Let's talk more about that in a second. And again, a whole combination of things, a whole incredible combination of things that led to some very profound spiritual, mental, emotional, many different experiences. And so let's get a quick taste of that. We'll take a look, very, very short video right here of Haley performing her wonderful flute. We'll full screen that and let's take a listen. So that's a very, again, brief little video there. But as you can see, I mean, it's beautiful. First of all, Adam's calendar is situated on this massive, massive cliff, couple 100 feet, I'd say, above the ground below us there. It's just absolutely stunning. And with that flute playing that you were hearing from Haley, it really, and it affected everybody. We all talked about it afterwards. And when the flute playing really started, it really allowed for the sort of transcendence and the out of sort of not out of body experiences necessarily. It was more just the realizations and the healing and all the things that everyone experienced to start, I think, really starting to snowball and started to happen once the music got going. Why don't we just talk a little bit about the instrument that you were using? What was this flute again that you were using?
It's a Native American flute made of madrone wood, which is a sacred wood in the Northwest, Pacific Northwest. It's a wood that's never burned. It is used for making instruments, and it was used for making boats and so forth. It's very sturdy. There are some ancient stories about boats made of madrone wood that saved the people and got them to shore when people with different kinds of boats didn't make it. So it's really revered by the local people there. And it has I think, just a beautiful resonant sound too, that, all woods have different qualities, even different mystical qualities in some traditions. Good friend of mine, Thomas, what's Thomas's last name? Wrote a book called about the mystical qualities of wood. I'll have to get that name for you later.
Yeah, definitely.
But so I selected this flute to be the flute that I brought with me because of those qualities. And I never played it before. Before I got to South Africa, I just bought it. So I was really just kind of playing around. The song that you did, I think that piece, that snippet that you did, I didn't remember right away, but the feel of it seems to me like what came out in round 2 of my playing. I played for a little while, then I paused. It was okay.
Yeah.
Because that was like a kind of gathering song almost. And the first one was just a little bit kind of deeper and slow.
Yeah. So the reason I can't show it is because I was in full-fledged experiencing that song that you performed for us. So our audience, unfortunately, that song it was a one-time only experience for the people participating, but it was an incredible experience. Sorry?
I think Michael recorded that first one.
Oh, I think you're right.
Reach out to him and see if he has it. I've never.
Yeah, well, I gotta get him on the podcast anyway. So
yes, okay.
We'll get that from him soon enough. But okay. So I mean, moving forward from this incredible experience, Haley, I mean, let's talk about maybe the aftermath of this experience. I know we had I had my experience, you had your own, and everybody else had very individual experiences. Why do you think this is? Because this is not the first time. I know in Egypt there was a very different but similar experience that I had with a statue at the Temple of Karnak called Sekhmet, and she's this old ancient feminine deity that represents healing and compassion. And I know when I saw that statue, there was something happened. I can't quite put it into words, but quite a few people also had that same experience, but different. They experienced similar but different things, just like we did in Adam's calendar. Why is that?
That's, I'm still unpacking that. I'm not sure about that. It's actually easier to understand what I sort of conceptualize as the second part of that process, which was a kind of a gathering and a coming together. Music has that ability to kind of create a space in which everyone kind of resides and feels united and unified. I'm sure everybody can think of experiences where music does a big concert where everybody in listening to certain music. So that I have a lot of experience and understanding of. This phenomenon of everybody going completely different experience seems to me more to do with a different kind of medicinal property of music. And I actually associate it to some extent with like plant medicines like ayahuasca. That was a similar thing. Music was part of that experience. Everybody had a very deep, profound experience. and each of them got what he or she needed. And those were different things because they were all different people.
Yes.
I don't know, it's something about just giving folks an anchor to hang on to, or a sense of being held while they get whatever they need from this experience. So it's not that the music gave it to them, gave a different thing to everybody individually. I think it's more that it created a sort of a container within which people were able to kind of go deep and hang on to that anchor, sort of. It's sort of how I can conceptualize it.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, it's we're going into obviously speculation. We're going into, areas that I'm really excited for science to start getting more into, and to start getting into senses where you can at least maybe do more practices like this, and take, vital signs and other physical readings that we can actually, measure, at least right now, before, during, and after these experiences, maybe to get some better insight on, what on earth is going on during these experiences, because clearly something is happening. This is obviously, there's so many benefits from these types of healing experiences that we want to be pushing these things, because it helps. Every human being has anxiety. Every human being has a trauma of some kind. Every human being has baggage that they need to get over. And, there's this constant theme that I'm coming across with all the research into the past, which is that there is lost knowledge, and there's things that we were doing that we should be bringing back, and we sometimes do. We got yoga, we have meditation, even things like acupuncture, for example. We have no idea what the meridians represent for acupuncture. We still can't find a physical representation, but we know it works. And that's even accepted by Western science, which is pretty interesting.
Right. It's not physical at all, but a different, like, energetic dimension.
Exactly. And like, what's going on there? We still don't quite get it, but it's accepted because it works. So, with that in mind, there's other interesting areas that you've covered here, in this essay, which of course we'll link in the description below. But kind of summarizing the experience a little bit here, Adam's calendar, and I guess now that we've had a year to reflect on the experience that we all collectively had back there, what. I think I left South Africa, as well as Egypt and other places I've been to like this, with more questions than answers. But with 1 year to reflect, when you're looking back on this experience, what is kind of maybe the key takeaway that you can take away from that 2 weeks in South Africa?
Oh, it's so, I feel like I feel it, but I can't yet articulate it. Something profound happened there for all of us. And Adam's calendar was like a coming to a head. And if you look back at the individual lives of each of those people who met together in that time, everybody told a story of feeling as though they just had to do this. They had to go there. They had to be there. Had to find a way to make that happen. And then we did. And then after sort of the BAC, the after Adam's calendar, the AAC period of time, everything changed. Major things changed for people. You're in a completely different place in your career right now. And that was one of the awarenesses that came away with in Adam's calendar. There are others who made dramatic changes in like their relationships and in other aspects of their life. And in really beautiful ways. Recently, we've kept in touch, which is kind of nice. We've had regular sort of video conferences, so I know where people are at and what's happening with them, because we keep touching base. And there was another individual who, I'm going to say his first name, I don't think I'll be giving anything away, Nassim, was sharing the other day when we had our Stone Circle Humans video conference, that he stopped smoking like for 2 months. He's made major life changes, just behaviorally. And it's taken a while for them to all take place. It's little by little over the course of the year, but he ties it all back to the love that he felt in that space. And was, it was beautiful the way he was stating that. I don't think that is naturally the way he always talks about things, but we really had an experience of love there that has sustained the changes that started right
I,
then. So I don't know, that probably sounds kind of foo-foo, but it
no,
was
no,
also
no. I
very
mean,
real.
you're making me think again, Haley, because all I can really, when I reflect, it's kind of the same thing. Like, can I summarize what we experienced? No, I can't really articulate it, because what you experience when you go to any of these sacred sites, there's two kind of profound things that happen when, and I encourage our audience, there's so many tours, so many places in the world. We've got every continent on the planet has ancient ruins that you can go explore. And it isn't just a fun tourist destination. It isn't just a fun place to go take selfies. It's, these places are so profound for healing, for self-reflection, for also making new friendships and new connections, because I haven't been on one of these trips where I don't make profound human connections, friendships, etc., that I know will last me the rest of my life, because there is not only something in common that you all share together, but like you mentioned, there was such a profound sense of love, togetherness, and connectivity that on a very human, basic, raw human level, it strips down all the social, economic, religious, etc., statuses and things, that labels that we wear in everyday in society, and we connected as a cohesive group of humans, hence the name of the chat group we have, the Stone Circle Humans. And this is something that I think our audience really can benefit from beyond just healing, as a life experience. If you're experiencing something, a point in your life where you're not sure where you want to go next, if you're feeling stagnant, if you're kind of feeling a bit of in a rut, there is nothing better than going somewhere like South Africa, somewhere like Egypt, somewhere like Stonehenge in Great Britain, somewhere like Machu Picchu in South America. I go to Peru, go to Mexico, etc. Even ancient China. There's so many incredible structures and places to go in Japan and all over in Asia. Everywhere you go, you will have an experience if you stay open-minded, you respect the space, and you go with that intention in mind. I think you'll get a lot of profound benefits out of that. I don't know if you have anything to add to that thought. That was a bit of a tangent there.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned. No, I'm glad you mentioned that importance of going with that intention. That's key. That's part of the priming. But I would also say, go to the place that's calling you. You know, it's not like look at a catalog. Oh, that looks good. You know, if there's something for you there, you'll know it, you know, as you're making that decision, like where should I go? It'll pull you there. And there's some kind of wisdom in that people get what they need when they follow their hearts, or follow where they're being called and pulled.
You follow your heart, follow your intuition. And there is something, like, let's say it's something that you've maybe been obsessed with. I know a lot of people I met in Egypt had that kind of calling since they were a kid. They always wanted to go check it out because of all the movies and documentaries. That's a fine enough reason. Or maybe it's the researcher, like for us with Michael Tellinger in South Africa, it was him, the researcher, that really brought us to that place in the world, because we really respected Michael and his research, and we wanted to learn more and meet him. Whatever the reason is, I think it's just really important to consider something like that for yourself. And I think
even if you don't know the reason at all. Even
exactly.
it's like, there is no reason. Like, why am I drawn to there? Go.
You don't need it. You do not. And this is I think one of the main things we've been trying to prove in this conversation is that sometimes you don't need a nice detailed list of reasons for certain things. Sometimes it really is a feeling, but that feeling can be more important than anything else. Haley, in our closing here, we've got a great episode already that we've just kind of whizzed through, which I really appreciate you being here. A couple of final thoughts just to sort of cap things off here. I would love to get your prediction for, what do you think the scientific world, and more particularly the sort of medical world, what does that look like, let's say 50 years from now in the future? What do you see happening with regards to our health, with regards to approaches for healing? What do you see 50 years down the road?
Yeah, you know, I hope to see us embrace existing technologies. They already exist. They're already helping people. I think that our understanding of them is going to increase. I think we're going to, at some point, recognize how ordinary it is that, if I intuit that maybe there's something going on in my kidney, that there may be something going on in my kidney, and that's not magical thinking. That's just human intuition. It's an ordinary capacity. So I'm hoping, and I believe that our appreciation of that will increase, and that we'll have deeper understanding, that we won't throw the baby out with bathwater. We'll maintain our best medical tools and sciences for investigating things and better understanding things. But we're going to see technologies embraced that have kind of been stigmatized up until now, maybe, and marginalized, and thought, oh, that's just foo-foo, whatever, that it'll be taken more seriously. I think things like art therapy and music therapy, I see them not as adjunctive, but as primary therapies. And so I think people might, even now, it's possible. I work as a primary therapist. I do everything from intake to diagnosis to treatment planning to individual group therapy, whatever, all that. I don't look to someone else to do that for me and then tell me, go do some music with them on the side. So that's a change I'd like to see more of in my field, is that sort of elevating the status of people who work with the arts in healing.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. And for myself, with my background in music, that's, to me, I look at music as far more than entertainment, and it's not from I'm on a high horse looking down on someone who's doing more than just entertaining people is better. No. But I mean, it is a tool. It's an incredible tool that if we start using it more scientifically and more targeted and more calculated type of an approach, we can really start to see some incredible healing and incredible shifts and changes take place, because again, both of us have experienced this on many, many different levels, but until there's this really nice convergence where it's not only taken very, very seriously, but it's getting a very targeted approach. And I'm hoping to kind of piggyback on your answer there. I'm hoping 50 years from now, that will be the case, where it's like, okay, so go home and listen to, half an hour of Mozart, and then you're going to, I mean, not like that exactly, but something where like your prescriptions might be, okay, you're going to go to the sound healing, temple or whatever it's going to be called then. And you're going to sit in this room that's acoustically designed in a very like perfect kind of way. Like some of these pyramids I was in Egypt experiencing that had the most incredible resonance ever, where you feel like you're getting a full body massage basically when someone starts to chant or do an om or whatever. And that scientific approach and that way of creating things that I think music, and I think sound, and I think art therapy and all those things are going to start to become just as common and as normal as we get prescribed pills for the same kind of thing today.
Yes. Oh, I think so too. And because my tradition is in human psychology primarily, but I think we'll see a particular prescribed sort of musical vibration or just sound vibrations killing cancer cells, and very prescriptively, things like that. So from the medical field, that's probably going to explode.
Yeah, and that's a whole other topic that I would love to do a podcast on, which is destroying cancer with sound and vibration. There is a great TED Talks video, which I will also link in the description below, because I think everyone should definitely check out. It's one of actually quite a few examples of people who have, honestly, it looks to me that they've cured cancer, and then their funding gets pulled somehow. But anyway, that's a whole can of worms. But you watch them shatter like a leukemia cell with vibration, and what they do is they look for the resonant frequency of that particular cell. So instead of chemo, which is like dropping a nuclear bomb on everything and just obliterates everything that's there, which is not efficient or effective, really. This is a targeted approach, and they're using sound and vibration. They find the resonant frequency of that cell and just sort of shatters, and just that cell's gone. All the other cells around it, no problem. They're still intact. And you can see it live and in action on a couple of these TED Talks that are, to me, an example of what the future really should be, getting out of this pharmaceutical kind of mindset and looking into copious amounts of other methods. It doesn't have to be just sound. It's going to be visual, like you said. Art therapy. Art therapy is it's a whole bubble. It's just all these more intuitive, artistic, creative ways to do exactly what normal medicine is trying to do right now. You know, so I think that's fantastic. Let's leave it at that. Thanks again for joining me, Haley. Really appreciate it.
You're so
And
welcome.
great. And you know what? We'll probably have to have you on because because there's just too many things to cover and to talk about on this subject matter. It's endless, and I
Yeah.
know we'll have more to talk about in the future. So thanks again. And just so for our viewers, I'm going to come back on and talk a little bit more on the next segment. So for now, Haley will sign off. Thanks so much for being here, and really appreciate it.
You're so welcome, and thanks for having me. I'd love to come back again.
Awesome. Well, appreciate you being here on Ancient Mysteries Unearthed. All right. Well, I hope everyone enjoyed the second episode of the podcast for Ancient Mysteries Unearthed. And I just wanted to say a big thank you to Dr. Haley Fox, who was just such a great presence to have on the show today. I really appreciated her wisdom, wealth of knowledge, and her warm presence as always. Thanks again, Haley. Really appreciate you coming onto the show. And for everyone that's watching, check the description below because I've put a couple of links to the books that Haley has written, which we did not discuss but have great relevance to what we're talking about today. And of course, the essay that we were discussing on the show that is also linked in the description below, so check that out. Lastly, we were discussing Michael Tellinger, so I also put some links to his work in the description below. Check those out. And if you have any more questions or comments, please let me know in the comments below. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll catch you next time on Ancient Mysteries Unearthed.